Astronauts report a field course. T-minus 5 seconds. 4, 3, 2, 1.
Welcome to Beyond the Launch, the podcast that explores what really happens after the deal is signed and the product goes live. Because real impact doesn't come from implementation alone. It comes from intentional, strategic customer success. Hosted by Ivan Whitaker, an experienced executive in sales, customer success, and implementations, including complex 911 and public safety implementations. This podcast goes beyond the launch to uncover what truly takes drive, adoption, measurable outcomes, and long-term success.
Welcome to Beyond the Launch from the Utah Podcast Studio. Today's guest, Sophie Kather, is the managing partner of Civic North Consulting. She works with GovTech companies, nonprofits, and public sector suppliers to simplify the complex world of grants, RFPs, and contract vehicles. She is known for breaking down complicated requirements into strategy that teams can actually execute, getting organizations out of the weeds and turning opportunity into clear, actionable next steps. But here is what makes Sophie's story especially interesting. She did not get here through a traditional consulting path. She built her way through 2 decades of doing the actual work. She started her career in sales operations and spent years at Cardiac Science as contracts administrator, eventually becoming manager of contracts and intellectual property. She then moved to Zetron, a public safety communications company where she held a series of increasingly senior roles: state contracts administrator, state contracts manager, senior program manager of global operations, and ultimately senior director of revenue operations. She studied paralegal at Berkeley, completed coursework at Harvard Business School, and somewhere along that journey, she looked at the way GovTech companies were approaching public sector procurement and saw something that most people inside those organizations had stopped seeing. The problem was not a writing problem, it was an operations problem. Sophie built Civic North to fix exactly that, and she did it for GovTech vendors, for nonprofits in rural and underserved communities who deserve a fair shot at federal funding. Today's episode is called Proposals Are an Operations Problem, How a RevOps Operator Built the System GovTech Has Been Missing. Sophie, welcome to Beyond the Launch.
Thank you for having me, Ivan.
Sophie, we've had some great interactions and provided support in your correspondence. I just had to have you on the podcast. Not many people actually talk about revenue operations, and so that is something that I'm familiar with in the private sector, but I just had to have you on to have this discussion. So thank you for coming on the podcast today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to dig in.
So Sophie, just like everyone that joins the podcast, we always start with a couple of icebreakers. And so you have seen the same broken pattern across organization after organization. Companies with strong products and capable teams walking away from serious opportunities or losing contracts they should have won. When did you first recognize that pattern clearly enough to name it? And when did you realize building a system to fix it was something you could actually do?
Yeah, I suppose I first recognized it during my time at Cardiac Science. That company manufactures AEDs and they sell into law enforcement quite regularly. They had at the time a partnership with the Red Cross, and that partnership bore fruit for them, but only because they were able to get through the competitive bid process successfully. Then they went on to get on to a NASPO contract and unlocked more government sector opportunities. But prior to that, they had just been selling devices to lay people or, one dentist's office here or, one doctor's office here. And they had such a compelling product. It was the first on the market that a person like you or I could just own in our home. Now, of course, we can buy one at Costco. But at the time, right, you would have to buy one direct from manufacturer. Government had no ability to purchase that directly from the manufacturer or through our distribution network. So by unlocking those vehicles and those partnerships, they saw exponential growth.
And so with what you saw, how did that kind of reshape your game plan and how you wanted to infuse that into the things that you're actually doing today?
Yeah, I'm so passionate about helping government entities purchase the things that they require and the things that they actually need. And so often they have a vendor that they like, or they maybe know the scope that they want, right? But they do not have kind of the back office capability to draft an RFP, to go through the procurement process. So I like to think that I'm helping them unlock those opportunities by helping my private clients secure those types of cooperative contracts. And then also teaching their sales team how to explain that to their customer. I don't know of any, let's say, law enforcement officer, firefighter who goes, yeah, I wanted to understand public procurement as part of my job. Like,
Right.
no, they don't
Yep.
care. They just want to buy what they want to buy, right?
Yep. Interesting conversation for me because we're in the middle of just a tech boom right now. And so
Yes.
this year alone, I've already gone through 2 RFPs, and you know how much time that takes.
Mhm.
And there's no training on it, right? So I got all of my training in the private sector, but imagine all of those leaders that don't get an opportunity to be in that space. And
Right.
so I just want to make sure you support both the private and public sector. Is that correct?
I can. I typically tend more toward the private sector just because cooperative contracting is my passion. It's my passion to explain that process to an internal sales team. I'm a helper just by nature, and I love being adjacent to that type of team, any kind of go-to-market team. However, I have worked with, government sector to help them write their RFP or to apply to a grant that may be available. So I go on both sides, but ethically, I could not help write the RFP and then also the response to the RFP. That's not something
Absolutely.
that we do.
Revenue operations is not the most obvious origin story for a founder who builds proposal systems and public sector strategy. What did RevOps teach you that became the backbone of how you think about procurement, and what did it take a while to unlearn?
What did it take me a while to unlearn? I would say the single most important thing in business, revenue operations, to a government client is, can you prove your outcome? What are you measuring and why? I think that oftentimes I see this across the board with so many of my clients today. They focus so much on features, or they focus, if they're a nonprofit, on the mission, but they don't focus on the metrics behind it. And I think that gives me a little bit of an edge in the space because RevOps is solely focused on metrics and
Right.
improving things like your win rate, your customer stickiness, all of those things, right? And so I usually will come into an organization and I'll say, look, I just need your data. I don't care if it's a mess, but we will get through this together, and we're going to help prove outcomes and not features. Outcomes can
Exactly.
be tied to features, but in government contracting, it's what can you prove?
Exactly. I was first introduced to RevOps by a gentleman. I believe he is the marketing executive director now of Priority Dispatch, and started a RevOps team, and really was fascinated at how much it wove into the success of what we were doing. Can you explain a little bit about RevOps? I want our listeners to know how that weaves in.
Yes, absolutely. So the way that I like to describe RevOps as a function within a business is sort of the flywheel in between marketing, customer success, sales, finance, right? They are the cog that keeps the machine spinning. So my team had everything from bids and proposals to customer contracts to our CRM system, and then all of the tech stack that went with it. And it was awesome because we got to see sort of the entire customer lifecycle in action, and we got to solve problems along the way.
Absolutely. And so walk us through what the final week before an RFP deadline actually looks like inside of an organization that does not have a proposal system. What is happening, who is doing what, and what does the week cost the organization beyond the hours on the clock?
That's a great question. Do you know that meme where it's like a dog sitting with like everything burning around it and like an office chair, and it says, "This is fine"? I feel like
Yes.
any proposal manager who is, or seller, some sellers do their own bid responses, who has a bid due tomorrow, knows exactly what I'm talking about. It feels like everything's on fire, and you've no way to kind of put out all the last minute things that are popping up. I think I like to help people with a system. And so the first thing you do the minute you get that RFP is you're putting together a compliance matrix. That's the very first thing. And you are putting together your win themes. And again, like we talked about, what can you prove, right? What pain are you solving for that end customer or agency? And how do you prove that? And maybe that is through features, or maybe that's through your past performance. But starting with, that matrix and putting that together in a cohesive way, I think makes all the difference.
So I've read a lot of RFP proposals. A lot of the proposals that I've read are very close. And, when you get through to the end in the point system, what would be your recommendation on how to differentiate from your competitors in the RFP process?
I always take another look. I look one level deeper when I'm reading that RFP, because you will find clues about the person who wrote it and what their actual pain is. What problem are they trying to solve ultimately? Now, they may have partnered with someone else or taken an RFP from a neighboring jurisdiction or somebody that they know, right? And they may have modified it to suit their unique experience. My job is to be a detective and to pull out those pain points. That helps me discover what it is that they're actually after. Of course, you want to be compliant so that you get as many points as possible. But underneath that is a need every time.
Absolutely, Sophie. You nailed it. In my writing RFPs, one of the things I stick on is customer success, right? Think about it. We have a podcast about it. And so from an RFP process, what am I writing from an expectation perspective? I definitely lean towards making sure that we have great customer success in our partnership. And so you're absolutely correct to say that there is something that's underneath. Sophie, your readiness sprint is a 1 to 2 week diagnostic that tells a company whether they should even pursue a specific opportunity. Most organizations skip that entirely. They respond to everything and wonder why they win so little. What does it actually cost a company to respond to an opportunity they should have declined? And how do you make that case to a leadership team that is afraid of missing something?
Yes, of course, that can be hard to explain. I would say you do not have infinite back office resources. No organization does. I don't care how large you are. You have to chase opportunities that you have done the work on the front end for, I would say. And so I have a system where I go through a series of questions and answers to determine how much capture work has actually been done within an organization. Of course, if at the end of the day, we go through that and they get a bad grade, but it's still something that they deem worth pursuing, of course, I'm at the client's mercy. However, I have found that by teaching them to be a little bit more strategic and say no when they should, it actually helps them go after the right kind of opportunity. Anybody in go-to-market will tell you, if you're chasing everything, you're chasing nothing.
Right. Sophie, there's two things. You're talking about sticking to your market strategy, right?
Yes.
So that's the reason the executive teams are meeting on a weekly basis, and it's easy to have scope creep when you're looking at what you're trying to do from a market perspective. The other piece is, can you provide us with an example of a situation where a company, they have a strategy to say, you know what, we're not going to respond to this particular proposal?
Well, it's a good question. I just helped company say no to a statewide cooperative contract. And the reason was that they did not have the customer base actually in that state to warrant getting through the process. The RFP was super particular that they wanted past performance and they wanted referenceable accounts. Without that, you would be throwing something at the wall and hoping that it sticks.
So your thought process is that sweat equity to be able to write for that RFP, you could pretty much be spending that time on other tasks or RFPs that could be more successful.
Right. Exactly. Or doing your capture work on things coming up that actually are a fit.
Absolutely. So if a GovTech founder listening to this could only do one thing tomorrow to improve their proposal process, what would you tell them to do? And why does that one thing matter more than everything else they could start with?
I would put together a very strong go, no-go process. I would put together your list of questions and answers for that go, no-go, and then I would stick to following the grade. If the grade is, 60 or less, it's a no-go. If it's higher, it's a go. And some of that comes down to fit, right? It could be technical. Some of it comes down to capture work. Do you have a relationship within that agency? Do you have a champion? What problem is that agency trying to solve? And can you solve it? And can you clearly describe how?
Right.
If the answer is no to most of those, questions, it's a no-go. And then the team can go back to whatever other bids they're working on or their capture work that they're working on for something else, right? But oftentimes I'm working with companies that have very limited capacity and their internal resources are very stretched. So you have to almost be ruthless about it. And I think by having a system implemented and by having ground rules that everyone agrees to, it helps remove a lot of that friction and that back and forth.
Sophie, that go, no-go metric that you're talking about, that scale, is it a different scale for every single RFP, or is there just a baseline scale that you create, kind of a one-time template?
I will create it specifically for my customer. So every customer in GovTech is going to be different, right? A go, no go for an AI company looks a lot different than a radio tower provider or, maybe even a service provider. So I think it's a mix of 1, technical capability, 2, what the market's telling you, and then 3, your capture work.
I'm loving this line of conversation because I'm putting a connection with, if you can't meet the requirements, say it's implementation, customer success, maybe there's a large 911 center that is covering multiple organizations and you just don't have the infrastructure to be able to support it, then that is a clear sign that even if you win, there might be issues or challenges downstream.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. And nobody wants to have their performance metrics that government uses, right, for that vendor to suffer post-award, especially in certain situations where you may be bidding a federal project.
Yes. And so Civic North also works with nonprofits, particularly community organizations in rural and underserved areas. These are resourceful teams doing substantial work with focused capacity. What does good grant strategy look like for an organization like that? And how is the system you build for them different from what you build for a GovTech vendor?
That's a great question. I would say for nonprofits, particularly smaller ones or nonprofits in underserved communities or meeting a need that is, not widely met, I would say the first thing is to stop thinking that a grant program is going to solve all of your funding problems. It's not a magic bullet. It is a layer on top of your funding strategy that you currently have today. And again, same issue, just different customer type. So it's government dollars. You need to tell me what are your metrics? What problem are you solving? And how do you prove that? And then 2, what are you using the funding for? Why? And then how will you report on it? And I think most of the time, the executive director in these situations thinks, but we're doing such great work. Like, why wouldn't people want to give towards this cause? And yes, the cause is very important to them, but they're not thinking like a business owner or an operator. They're thinking like a person who wants to do deep good for the world. And I love that. And that's why I love helping them, but they need that business acumen.
Oh, yes. So this question involves AI. And so most companies experimenting with AI in proposal work are using it as a writing tool. You have a different read on where that goes wrong. What is the mistake they are making? And what does using AI well in a proposal process actually look like?
That's a great question. Probably something I could yap about like all day long. I've deeply embedded AI into my business, but I don't actually use it to write almost anything. I use it to iterate, to maybe edit, but I definitely don't use it to write, particularly in the government space. I would say AI is only as good as the context you feed it. That's one. And then two, as the process that you have already developed within your organization. So I run all of like my go no goes through an AI skill that I have created, right? It'll measure whether this is my ICP, whether I can actually help this ICP, and whether they're, you know, at the right price point for me and my business. And so, my go no go looks a little bit different. But then when I build a go no go for another client, I'm going to custom build that. And I do build that using AI. And it gives me a great branded landing page. But all of that context and that intelligence and understanding the business and the needs, that comes from the people who are embedded.
So you think using AI in the RFP process sets a tone with the reader that you don't want?
I think so. I think that there's so many AI writing tilts now, and I think people are tired. I think that they're exhausted by that writing style. It looks and sounds super polished, but I think that more than anything, people are craving a real human connection.
Good point.
And I think that you should not be so obsessed with a perfected writing process necessarily. But again, back to that point, are you solving their pain and are you able to articulate that? Yes, you can use AI to maybe make a first pass or to polish, but that comes from your capture work. The only person who's really going to understand that is the person who's interviewed the RFP writer on the other side or who sat in the room, right?
Yep. And so the period that preceded Civic North changed what you were building toward and how. Without dwelling on the difficulty, what was the clarity that came out of it, and how directly did that clarity shape the firm you decided to build?
I think, you and I have talked about just my experience within corporate managing a large global team. That is a lot for one person. It was very demanding. And I felt that the higher I climbed within that corporate infrastructure, the farther away I got from the things that I hold dear, which is being close to, the person taking the call or the sales team within an organization. And I'm a helper by nature. And that was the thing that I was missing the most. It was being a partner to somebody and then seeing the fruits of my labor, helping them grow and flourish. And I think the farther away you get from that, I was very blessed in my career. However, in thinking about what it was that I loved or that I missed, I realized that I really missed being part of that proposal team or that contracts team. Yeah. And being more involved in the doing.
So, Sophie, contract vehicles like GSA schedules, state master agreements, and cooperative purchasing contracts are supposed to make it easier for vendors to sell into government. In practice, most companies get on a vehicle and then underutilize it completely. What does it actually take to turn an award vehicle into revenue?
This is something that I love to yap about. I think that there is a real missing opportunity for most GovCon companies. They believe that they'll be awarded a NASPO contract and then tomorrow their revenue is going to spike, right? That's not really the case. There are things that you need to do to unlock that revenue. The first being sales enablement strategies, training your sellers on how to speak about that contract and how to educate their end user. Like we talked about before, a fire chief doesn't walk into that job and think, I'm going to learn everything there is to know about public procurement and, how to buy my radios and my fire trucks. No, they do not. They would like the seller to help walk that path with them. And oftentimes the seller is like their relationship person. They don't understand government contracts or why they need them or, why their customer can't just write a PO tomorrow. But those are tax dollars they're spending, and there has to
Right.
be a check and balance, right, associated with spending those tax dollars. And of course, depending on the agency type, the state that they're in, those rules of the road can be a little bit different. So I get very excited to be embedded with the sales team to help teach them just the basics and how to talk about it. That's kind of what lights me up. And then I would say, on the flip side too, the compliance that you signed up for. You signed a litany of documents when you submitted your RFP response. And now
Right.
you need to make good on those promises. So do you have the back office capability to do your reporting? Do you have the
Yeah.
back office capability to keep up on your PAs if it's a NASPO contract, for instance?
Yes.
And if the answer is no, then you need to seriously think about whether or not you're going to invest in that, because post-award, that's something that you've signed up for.
Sophie, you mentioned sales enablement just now.
Mhm.
From your perspective, how well are vendors doing in the public safety space with sales enablement?
I would say I think it depends on, the company. There are several that do really well, and I think that they tackle the problem like a SaaS company would. And I think that, they have usually great sales enablement programs, and you can tell based on how those sellers interact with their customer, and they're embedded with that customer. Then there are others that, have not implemented maybe a RevOps team within their organization. And so their sales enablement program might look very technical. And I think that it should obviously contain elements of technical capability, but there needs to be also an element of a customer service beyond that. Like we were talking about explaining cooperative procurement to your customer, being able to take a problem that they're having, post implementation, and being the go-to person to solve that. That's great customer success.
Right.
It may not look like the original seller being embedded, but there needs to be kind of that flywheel like we were talking about within the organization to ensure that that customer is well taken care of. And I
Right.
think there are some companies that are doing a phenomenal job with this. And then there's others that are struggling because they just simply do not have that infrastructure set up.
You've also mentioned a couple of times RevOps teams. So we talked about the concept of RevOps, but I want to go into RevOps teams and make up and build out of that. What team members would make up a highly functional RevOps team?
I would say you've got probably a team. I used to refer to my team as like kind of the island of misfit toys, because we'd have folks who were like super technical. They did everything CRM. They would never want to talk to a seller, but they were, phenomenal people who could engineer a go-to-market application like in their sleep, or they'd stay up for 12 hours doing it at night or something. No, that's what
Right.
lit them up. And then I had people who, just were very loquacious and could explain any concept. They're a natural teacher. And I, helped bring them into the sales enablement space, right?
Mhm.
So that's a fit for them. I would say the personalities are all over the board. It's just, what are you good at doing and why? And I always loved that part of my job because I just got to deeply understand my people and where they kind of best fit. So I don't think it's any one personality. I think you can just be your awesome unicorn self,
Yep.
and you will find a role within a RevOps team. There is something for you.
Yep. I've had a number of conversations with organizations about RevOps, and one of the things that they seem to consistently struggle with is data. Is having the right data to be able to make the right decisions. Any thoughts on that?
Yes, I would say your data integrity is everything. I would rather have a limited data set that's accurate than a broad data set that is inaccurate, because you can't make decisions based on that, not qualified ones. I would say getting that foundation correct before implementing things like AI, like your dashboarding, all of that. The data integrity needs to come first. Thankfully, I worked in the public safety sector, so your customer counts are finite, right? They're not, springing up every other day or something. If anything, there's more consolidation that's happening. So, every industry, every company is going to be unique, but deciding what data you want and why and what you're trying to prove at the end of the day is like step one. I've helped a couple of different clients with some of their CRM implementations, and just because in proposals you get very embedded with them, and then with the RevOps background and everything, there may be different ways where I can help counsel them. And a few times, I've said, I am counseling you to just throw everything out because it is such a mess right now. I cannot tell you what the health of your business is right now.
Right.
Yeah. So, start almost clean slate and go from there. And then there's been other times where I've said, actually, you're in great shape, but you're not proving out, how your customers remain sticky with you or something like that. And then we've made, little tweaks here or there and not had to throw everything out. But I think that your data integrity is just everything. It's everything. And it's probably everything, for the dispatcher too.
Yeah. In one of the episodes, I mentioned having a CRM architect for exactly what you're talking about. Great take there. So the public sector procurement cycle moves at a completely different speed than commercial sales. For a GovTech company used to 30 to 90-day sales motion, the adjustment to 12 and 24 months is often disorienting. How do you help clients maintain pipeline health and team morale across a process that long?
That's a good question. Yes, in public sector sales, the sales cycles are much longer. I think that being very clear about what your pipeline stages are and training everybody involved on what they mean, that's your baseline. I've been embedded with companies that had 8 sales stages. I've been embedded in companies that had 2 or 4. Understanding how a lead becomes a viable opportunity. What are the rules? I think getting sort of those baselines down and then handling edge cases along the way is, a good place to start.
Yes.
And then, of course, training your entire team. It's not just the sellers that need to understand what those stages mean. It's also your executive team.
So if a GovTech founder is listening right now, they have a real product, they're starting to see public sector interest. What is the single most important thing they need to understand before they start writing?
Before they start writing, I would say, do you understand what the customer's pain is? And can you articulate a win theme? Meaning, can you articulate why your solution solves that pain in a measurable way? Think SMART goals, right? Time bound, measurable, actionable, right? Results oriented. So describe the pain for them and then show them how you solve it. If you cannot clearly articulate that in your win theme, I would say it's probably a no-go.
Before we get off the session, is there anything you want our listeners to know about Civic North, how they can contact you?
Sure. We are discoverable at www.civicnorthconsulting.com. I'm also on LinkedIn. If anything resonates with anybody here, DM me. I love to chit chat about everything AI and proposals, RevOps and GovCon, and then grant strategy. I have a meeting link that I will send you, and we can do a 30-minute chit chat and connect from there.
Sophie Kather, everyone. It's been a pleasure to have you on the podcast. You're just a wealth of information. I have so many questions away from the podcast that I'd like to chat with you about, but just a bright star in our industry today. Thank you for joining in.
Thank you for having me.